I was bold last game week, I sold Haaland and he blanked. I also captained Salah who scored, and game week 11 is a tight decision. Let's see if I'm bold again. First up on the shortlist is Haaland against Brighton away. Yeah, he's had a couple of blanks, but we all know how high his ceiling is. We know what he can achieve, and I do think he will be back to his best again soon. Next up is Son, who's got a very easy fixture against Ipswich at home. The problem is he fit enough to get anywhere near 90 minutes? And if he doesn't, is he worth captaining? And lastly on the shortlist is Salah against Villa at home. He's a player we can expect to get roughly 90 minutes, just like Haaland. And do we go for the minutes, or do we go for the fixture? Let's start digging. Looking at the non-penalty stats per 90 minutes, it's actually Haaland who's got the best underlying stats, but there's been a lot of regression in his numbers, and Salah's numbers are actually slightly higher than his, and Son's numbers aren't actually too far behind either, but he has overperformed his underlying stats massively, and the underlying stats are better at projecting future points than actual points themselves. So to be fair, Haaland's got the most promising numbers, then Salah, then Son. Son is an elite finisher, we know that, so he should keep up an overperformance, but there should be some regression there. I do expect a little bit more regression from Salah, but to be fair, he's a decent finisher, and so is Haaland as well, so we've got to go for those underlying stats. As for the set pieces, I would say Haaland and Salah do edge it slightly ahead of Son, not just because they have the odd chance of taking a direct free kick, it's because Son isn't as nailed on penalties as those two, although he does have a really good chance of taking them. So basically FPL Review have got Haaland and Salah down as a 100% chance of taking a penalty if one's awarded whilst on the pitch. As for Son, he's 77%, that's more than a 3 in 4 chance, and that's good enough to say, yeah, he probably will be on penalties, but he's not 100% certain. Before we move on, it is worth mentioning this is why Son made it onto the shortlist and not Solanke. It's because he's got a higher probability of taking a penalty. Speaking of probability, let's take a look at the odds. Haaland's got the highest anytime goal scorer odds yet again, but it's Son who's got the highest anytime assister odds, and when you combine them both together, he's also got the highest anytime return odds. He's only got a 34% chance of blanking. It is important to remember these odds are based on the assumption that each player plays 90 minutes, and we will take a look at the expected minutes later on in the video. That is crucial information for Son, so make sure you stay tuned because he's actually not that far ahead of the other two players when it comes to the odds. However, on the points projections, it is the Spurs talisman that's got the highest figure. He's got 7.3 on Fantasy Football Fix and 7.2 on FPL Review. Whilst we're going to take a look at the raw expected minutes data later on in the video, this does factor in the expected minutes on each data model, but even with all that considered, Salah's only 0.1 behind on FPL Review, but he is still 0.4 behind on Fantasy Football Fix. As for Haaland, he's quite far behind on both data models. We all know what the biggest pulling factor is for Son. It's of course the fixture against Ipswich at home. They've got the worst expected goals conceded figure in the whole league. It's worth noting for Salah, whilst Villa have conceded a decent amount of goals so far this season, their expected goals conceded figure is pretty good. If you put it this way, if Ipswich was to play 45 minutes and Villa were to play 90 minutes, they would be expected to concede a similar amount of goals. Does that technically not double the probability of each attacker scoring against that team? That's possible, but then Villa's numbers aren't the be all and end all. They might not stay as low as 1.1, and Ipswich's, I could expect them to stay quite high, maybe not as high as 2.3 per 90 minutes. Speaking of expected numbers, Brighton's expected numbers haven't been too good, and Haaland's were the best on the shortlist earlier, so you could argue with the player and opponent combination, is Haaland the best option? But then you've got to consider that he does have to travel away from home to Brighton, plus Son and Salah have the home advantage, and another debate is, would you rather travel away to Brighton or play against Villa at home? If we look at the clean sheet odds, it's looking like Villa at home is the slightly easier fixture. That's considering City and Liverpool have a similar strength of attack. And those clean sheet odds back up what I said earlier, where I said Ipswich are twice as likely to concede a goal in 90 minutes than Villa. They have literally got half the clean sheet odds. Spurs have the highest clean sheet odds this game week, which means Son's got a 38% chance of getting a clean sheet point. That benefits him above Haaland because he's a midfielder himself. That's the same for Salah. His clean sheet odds aren't quite as high, but they're still the third best with 32%. Either way, the key takeaway for this section is that Son's got the easiest fixture by far. Before we conclude, we're going to carry out a quick risk assessment. Both Haaland and Salah featured in Europe for 90 minutes, but they get 4 recovery days, and their expected minutes are reliable. As for Son, I'm not sure if he's going to feature in Europe yet. This video's been recorded before that fixture. If he does, then it's less than 3 recovery days, but I'm unsure how many minutes he's going to play in that one. If he doesn't feature, he does get a week's worth of rest. I don't think it matters too much how many minutes he plays in that match. You could build a narrative either way. We know Postecoglou managed his minutes in the last Premier League game, didn't quite make it to 60 minutes, so if you played him for 90 in this, it means he's back fit. If he doesn't, that means he's had more rest. I do think Postecoglou can be trusted with managing his minutes. The concern for me is whether he will manage his minutes against Ipswich. I don't think Son will make it to 90 minutes. Now, he has got 85 expected minutes on FPL review, and that does tip him above Salah on the points projections, but for me, I do think they will be slightly lower, so it does make it a difficult decision. If I thought Son was going to play 90 minutes, I would probably just straight up captain him against Ipswich at home. One thing I can say, there's not much between the three of them, but Haaland's just about my third favourite pick. That's because he's not got the home advantage. And whilst I don't think Son will make it to anywhere near 90 minutes, when you compare the Ipswich defence against the Villa defence, I do think that's too good to ignore. I think the best captain for Game Week 11 is Son. I have a new Patreon with no supporters yet. If you want to be the first to support the channel and get exclusive benefits, click the link in the description to the Patreon page.